Hey, everybody. I just took a walk. My hair looks a fright. So, what I started doing this week is a series called the 5 Days of Focus. This is day 2. We're going to talk about how a content first development approach actually will save you money. So, yesterday, we talked about how a content first development approach saves you money. We talked about the proposal versus a master services agreement versus the contract, and how to use those documents and your proposal to set proper client expectations. What we covered there as a recap, it's important to include your processes in those documents so you can set those proper expectations. But before you can really improve your proposal with better processes, you need to focus on your processes. That's what we're going to do over the next couple of days. How a content first development approach saves you money, because this is one of the very first processes you need to define or improve. I have too many title slides in this presentation, I can tell right now. But first, let's look at the actual problem. This is the traditional way agencies do website development. They get a 50% deposit up front. They're planning to get a 50% deposit at the end, but when it comes time for the client to pull the client content together, or whoever's doing it, third party or whoever, that's when the project stalls. What ends up happening in a lot of cases is the project, when you're supposed to get that other 50% of money, gets pushed further and further out, and you're left scrambling to try to fill the void of this project you thought you were going to be working on, but you can't do anything because the client hasn't given you the content. The other problem with this slide is the stages are not even in a normal project. Normally, we spend a lot more time on the planning, and so each of the stages are not totally even. And these aren't the stages that we use anyway. It's just a really good graphic for showing where the content problem comes into play. There's a number of ways to solve this problem of project stalling while waiting on content, because this method simply does not work anymore. But before we go any further, let's look at what content first really means. Content first design is where you consider the totality of the content before you create the design. What that results in is a design that best accommodates the content, and that's super important. Content first development, on the other hand, is when you don't build anything until all the content has been received. And for some, that seems like it's a little extreme, but I'll tell you, it really does end up saving you money and streamlining your process. Let me back up a slide. You get the benefit of a design that best accommodates the content, just like with content first design, but it also puts the proper resource in control of the content, makes the project less likely to stall, which also in turn reduces your development time, and you preserve return on your investment or your profit margin. Those two items highlighted in yellow are the ones that are really going to save you money. But the question to ask yourself is, how much money are you losing to content-related delays? Let's look at a possible scenario. When clients miss their dates, here's what you have to do. You have to rework the schedule. You have to nag the client. You have to reprioritize your other commitments, and you have to adjust your cash flow predictions. That's just a smidgen of what you have to go through when the client causes a delay. Anytime they cause a delay, this is what it costs you. This affects your ability to plan and execute the next project, which is huge in terms of the impact it has to your business. So what is your time worth? Let's just say, for the sake of argument, your time is worth $125 an hour. I'm not saying this is an hourly rate you publish to the client, or this is an hourly rate you necessarily even use for estimating. This is the hourly rate you give to your time when you're not spending it on furthering your business. Let's just say that reworking the schedule took you 2 hours, nagging the client took you somewhere between 2 and 4 hours, reprioritizing took you anywhere between 4 to 6 hours, and adjusting your cash flow predictions took 2 hours. So you just lost 14 hours of time, which is an equivalent of $1,750. That's huge. You don't ever want to do that. So how do you save money by using a content first approach? First of all, you need to set proper client expectations. Part of doing that is to set incentives for complying with the schedule and penalties for not complying with the schedule. Although we don't present them as incentives and penalties in that literal form. If you are a student of the WP Project Managers Academy, inside the premium membership, we have a client expectations guide for content that covers all the different places and ways to set those expectations for the client. We also have a sample internal content collection process and then client-facing sample content collection process, because they're not the same thing. What the process you write for your internal process is not necessarily something you would publish to the client. You have to extrapolate from that and give the client what they need to understand your content collection process. That's the first thing, is setting the proper client expectations. The second thing is to use a repeatable process for estimating content. What we use for this, we call a rough order of magnitude, and we use a spreadsheet. In that spreadsheet, after we've come up with the sitemap, we can look and see how many pages there are, and then we can just do a best guess of how many paragraphs there'll be of text, how many images there will be, how many videos there will be, if there's audio, how much of that there'll be. That helps you determine the magnitude of work. By estimating the magnitude of work, it helps you to convince the client that they need to hire help. Because if you, and I've said this a million times, two things: if you aren't estimating the magnitude of the content, then you can't estimate the time that's needed to create it. The other thing is, if you try to convince the client they don't have the skills to create the content or write the content, create videos, get images, whatever it is, you try to convince them they don't have the skills, you're always going to get pushback. But if you show them how much time it's actually going to take by using this rough order of magnitude, then that's one of the best ways to convince them they need to hire help, whether that's you because you provide content as part of your offering, or a third party, or whoever, someone else other than the client. Also, by doing this estimating of content, it ends up giving you a much more precise project estimate. The rough order of magnitude spreadsheet we use is available inside the WP Project Managers Academy, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. Another way you can save money when you're dealing with content is to embrace the minimum viable website concept. I kind of stole this from the minimum viable product concept that startups use. That is, it's better to get a minimum viable product out there and get your client input and feedback before you actually launch your startup. The same thing is true here. And this works best for clients who are wanting to get a website up really quickly, or more quickly than they can possibly pull all the content together. Or for a client who wants an updated website and also wants to add to it. Some of that content will already be done. What you need to do in this case is to find out what content is already done or what can be pulled together in short order. Break the project into phases. You've got your minimum viable website followed by the full website. So phase one is the minimum viable website, but you still need to define the entire website. You really need to define the entire website spec first, then build the minimum viable website based on the content they already have, with an eye toward how the website will look in its final form. But if you don't do the whole spec first, you're likely going to create rework for yourself. Phase two is everything that didn't get into the minimum viable website. Another way to save money, these last two are probably the most important, and that is to structure the project plan for content first. These are the phases that we use. But before I go over those, let me ask you a question. It's sort of a rhetorical question. If you had everything you need to build a website, if you had everything you needed, And it was all just sitting there. All the plugins were defined. You knew exactly what you were going to use. All the content sitting there just ready for you. How long would it really take you to create that website? Not very long, unless it's super complicated with a lot of different bells and whistles. But for the most part, for a standard type of website, even an e-commerce site, if you've got all that stuff there first, it's really not going to take very long to develop it. That's why we spend so much time in our methodology here in these phases on the planning part. This is 5 phases. It ends up being labeled as 4 because phase 0 is proposal creation. I don't call that a phase until a project has been approved. Since it's not really a project yet, I call this phase 0. That's where you're going to do that estimate of the needed content, that rough order of magnitude. Phase 1, which is our deep dive discovery phase, this is where we're getting all the detail for the website. That's when you identify who is going to do the content and when they're going to do it. And then you also need to estimate again, because many things change as you're going through this process of your deep dive discovery. Phase 2, where we're doing design and preparation, where we as the developers are basically preparing the environment, maybe setting up a few plugins, but we're not doing any development. This is when the client goes to collect all the content. We don't start development until phase 3. That's when we use content that has been delivered to us by the client. When you spend more time on the planning, you're going to end up with faster development, because most of those problems or changes, you've already discovered them during the planning phase and you've remedied them. So there's fewer of the gotchas, and that allows you to have fewer review cycles. If you spend the proper time on planning with the proper deliverables, by the time you begin development, all those assets are sitting there and ready for you. The copy of our project plan with the phases, activities, and tasks, once again, inside the WP Project Managers Academy. The last one is that you need to restructure your payment schedule to ensure you're not left holding the bag in the event the project stalls. What I've outlined for you here kind of assumes a 2-step proposal process. I'll give you the quick and dirty of what I mean when I say that, for those of you who may not have been following for very long or aren't a student in the academy yet. We recommend a 2-step proposal process where phase 1 is deep dive discovery. The reason we do that without being more precise is because you can't possibly have all the answers after an hour-and-a-half meeting with the client. You've got to do that deep dive. Now, some folks, some agencies will position that as a completely separate project with a deliverable at the end of here's the website specification. And you can do it that way. There's no problem with that. The most important thing is that you get paid for everything you do. A lot of people will do this deep dive discovery, put all of that detail in the proposal, and then the client takes and gives it to somebody else who will do it for cheaper. This is why you don't include all of the detail in the proposal. You wait until you've got the project approved, you're starting on the project, and the first phase 1, let me back up. Phase 1 is project definition phase, where you do that deep dive. And at the end of the deep dive, if we found so many changes and so many new things that weren't discovered in that initial meeting with the client, and we discover those things, that ends up making it exceed the range I gave them in the proposal, I give the client the option to cancel. They hardly ever do, because they've been shoulder to shoulder with you. They know which things they came up with later, or new ideas we came up with is better than what we've originally discussed. If those things happen during that phase 1 and that exceeds the second estimate, they already know what it's for. They hardly ever cancel. But if they do cancel, we just give them that specification and say bye-bye and let them take it to someone else if they want to. But look at the way we've got this payment schedule laid out. A lot of people will say, well, I do 25, 25, 30, and 10, or I don't even know that those numbers add up to 100. That's an arbitrary decision. Why are you doing it that way? It makes no sense. You're just coming up with a percentage to get paid at certain milestones. It makes much more sense if you get paid ahead of time for each phase you complete. The way we do it is upon acceptance of the proposal, we get X number of dollars as a deposit. Whatever that deposit is covers all of that phase one. That means phase one is paid for. That's the deposit. Once they accept the statement of work, which is what we call the website specification, the results of the deep dive, this is what the design's going to look like. This is how much content there's going to be. This is what the functionality is supposed to be. All of those things comprise the statement of work. When we turn that over, we get X percentage of the remainder of the project budget. I usually do that at a half, because then that covers the upcoming phases, the design and preparation and the development and testing. At the completion of testing, you see that big red thing in the middle where the client provides the content. Let's say that even in spite of all your efforts for them to get it done on time and to not have any bottlenecks, it still happens. If that's the case, it's a lot easier for you to manage because you've been paid for everything you've done up to this point, and you're not doing any more work until you get that content. At the completion of testing, we get usually 50% of the remainder. And then at the completion of training, we get all the remaining funds. But we do not move that site to the live environment until we get that final check. Let's do a quick review of what we just went over. As soon as I advance my slide. There we go. Okay, when projects stall, it costs you money, period. To save money with a content-first approach, you need to set the proper client expectations regarding the content collection bottleneck. Look, we know it happens. The client's going to respect you a lot more if you admit that it happens and tell them, here's the things we have in place to make sure that that doesn't happen so your project gets done on time. You need to use a repeatable process for estimating content before you estimate the project. You want to embrace the minimum viable website concept, structure the project plan for content first, and restructure your payment schedule to ensure you get paid for things. When you create a content first approach, you need to do an internal process and then a client-facing procedure. Here are some of the questions you need to answer. How will the content be requested? Are you going to use a tool like Content Snare? Are you going to use paper documents and folders on Dropbox or something like that? What content collection mechanism will be used? How the content will be requested, you may choose to do that through email. But then what content collection mechanism are you going to use to collect and organize that content? Once again, I mentioned Content Snare, which is what we recommend for this process, but there are lots of other ways to do it. It doesn't really matter what the tool is, although Content Snare is a pretty sweet tool. It matters whether it works for you and whether it works for your clients. The only way to find that out is to try different things and see which one works best for you. You also need to decide where the content's going to be stored and how it's going to be organized. What are the proper formats for each type of content? For example, I know some of us from time to time have gotten screenshots from the internet as an image to use on a website. We can't do that because it violates copyright laws. So what are the proper formats for each type of content? What are the proper sizes for images and things like that? How often will the client receive reminders along this process? And what are the criteria for content approval or rejection? In other words, the client submits content. What is your criteria for saying, you know what, we can't use this content? You may make a list of those things. This was written for print material. It's not appropriate for the web. It could be any number of things you do for, it's not the right size. It's too big. What all those criteria are for approval or rejection of the content. For the internal document, you need to answer these questions. What is content first? What does that even mean? What are the incentives for compliance? And what are the ramifications for non-compliance? And what is the actual procedure for requesting and submitting content? That's a description of what your content first approach for your internal stuff and your client should look like. If you need to get more details and examples of what to include in these documents, you know that you can get those inside the WP Project Managers Academy. You can join for free, or you can take advantage of our full launch special on the premium program, which is running right now. Will run to the end of January. And that's almost a 50% discount on the monthly subscription. And you'll be locked in at that price forever, but you can cancel anytime the program is no longer bringing you value. All the details are at that link of wproadmaps.com/join us. The free membership gives you access to the WordPress Project Management 101 roadmap, where you'll learn the basics and all the processes you need to have in place to consistently get projects completed on time, within budget, with features that meet the client's business requirements. The premium program not only includes Project Management 101, but it also includes the complete project management roadmap for WordPress. That's where we give you many, many more done for you assets you can take, modify, and start using right away. There's a ton more in the premium program, but you can find out all you want to know about at that link. If content collection is one of your struggles and you're looking for an end-to-end way to implement and automate your content first approach, then you also might want to join the premium membership, because it includes the content collection roadmap, which is inside the complete roadmap. This maps out for you step by step how to set things up and carry out all the steps of content collection, from setting proper client expectations to creating content collection templates and automating reminders and everything you want to do to streamline that process. Remember, the full launch special is only good till the end of January. The sooner you sign up, the sooner you can start getting your WordPress agency running like a well-oiled machine. You can spend time on your business instead of in your business. If you're not ready to go all in, that's perfectly fine. You can join the basic membership for free, and you can still get a big head start on improving your processes for 2021. So far this week, we've talked about focusing on improving your proposal and creating a content first approach. Tomorrow, I'm going to continue this series on the 5 days of focus with a live training on how to define project scope. I'm going to show you how breaking this down into 3 distinct yet comprehensive sections is going to really help you prevent scope creep. Oh, I forgot to show you, if you join the premium membership, these are the downloads available in the content collection roadmap. You get those sample content collection process, internal and external. You get that client expectations guide. You get our rough order of magnitude estimating spreadsheet. You get an Elementor wireframes template. And you get all kinds of stuff related to Content Snare, because that is one of the tools we recommend. You get a content collection implementation checklist you can follow when you're ready to implement this process. As I said, I got my slides out of order to my comments. This is what we covered Monday. Improve your proposal, but you can't do that without proper processes. Today, we started talking about processes, and we talked about content first, because it is the biggest bottleneck and the biggest threat to your profit margin. Tomorrow, we're going to cover how to define project scope. On Thursday, we're going to talk about why approval doesn't matter. And even though it's New Year's Day, we're still going to do a live on Friday, where we're going to talk about an overall plan for process improvement in 2021. I want to thank you for tuning in and watching this. If you're watching the replay, if you just type replay in the chat, that would be helpful. I hope you're getting some value out of this. Until tomorrow, when we talk about scope creep and how to define that whole project scope thing, stay productive, stay strong, and never stop learning. Bye, guys.